Welcome in to another episode of the Barnes on Bama podcast. I'm your host, Owen Barnes, and we have a few things to discuss. So we are going to discuss that big win over Texas A&M that Alabama was able to get in College Station that happened on Saturday. We're also going to discuss the Ole Miss game that is upcoming on Tuesday. However, I actually want to start the show with two other things that I mentioned at the end of last episode that I want to kind of discuss. Neither one I'm going to go into too much detail on, but just want to make sure that they are discussed because I do think that they are worth mentioning. One, first and foremost, I know that we have mentioned about Houston Millett. Houston Millett, a guy who I really like on this team. He's somebody that you can really tell from a leadership standpoint is somebody that I think the team really likes. He's a really good kid. I actually saw him and his dad when he walked at graduation. He actually graduated from the university, even though he was at Pepperdine for a few years. I got a picture with him post-graduation. And just a really, really good kid. Nate Oates and staff are actually exploring a possibility of a medical redshirt on him. There was a lot of talk about how after Latrell Wrightsl's injury, they thought about pulling Houston's normal redshirt, and they did do that. But Houston's been having some knee issues, and so those knee issues are having the team now explore a potential medical redshirt so that he does not burn his last season of eligibility. That's something that they're going to be exploring here coming up. He's not going to be playing here for the foreseeable future. If they do determine that a medical redshirt is something that's possible, there's a very good chance that you're not going to see Houston for the rest of the season. I do think that, as we've previously mentioned, he is somebody that can contribute if he's given the ability to play. You can tell he gives a lot of effort when he's out there. He's able to make shots. But obviously you don't want him to burn his last season of eligibility if it's on something that he's just not going to be able to contribute at the level in which he's comfortable with from a knee standpoint, as well as a not being able to practice over the offseason, which partially was a medical reason as well. So from that standpoint, I wanted to make sure I mentioned that. I know that Nate had mentioned it in the previous press conference, but I did not discuss it in the last episode, so I wanted to talk a little bit about that. The other thing I wanted to talk about before we get right into the games was the thing that was announced on the 10th. So for those of you Alabama fans that are aware, 1 year ago on January the 10th, it was announced that Nick Saban would be retiring. The infamous tweet by Chris Lowe that Nick Saban's retiring comes out, and Greg Byrne has to tell the team, hey, give me 72 hours. In just over 48 hours, he ends up hiring Kalen DeBoer. I was at the airport when Kalen DeBoer was hired. When he got off the plane with Courtney Morgan, they talk. They get to talk to the team. Then all of the kind of fallout of that with all the transfers, keeping the team together and everything that goes with that. So 1 year removed from that, on December the 10th this year, it was announced on College Game Day that Nick Saban was officially going to be inducted into the College Football Hall of Fame. Obviously, I think that this honor is absolutely warranted. This is absolutely something that he deserves. This is something that, if you're looking at a Hall of Fame, there's nobody, in my opinion, that's more deserving than Nick Saban. Obviously, he has the most national titles of any college football coach, but also just kind of what he's done for the sport as a whole, as well as, what his players have done. Some of the easy kind of notes that when you're talking about Saban's storied career: 9-time National Coach of the Year, coached for 28 seasons, has an over 80% win percentage, over 87% during his time in Tuscaloosa. He had 11 SEC titles over his career, 9 of which at Alabama. 52 first-round draft picks, including 47 at Alabama. He had 133 total draft picks in his time. He had 4 Heisman Trophy winners. For those of you, that may have not been aware, Alabama didn't have a single Heisman Trophy winner prior to Nick Saban. Saban has 4 himself, and the only 4 the university has had up to this point. And really just players have won tons of awards, and Saban has been kind of the guy behind a lot of that. And, Saban said, on College Game Day that he felt like he was just kind of the bus driver, so to speak, of the team, but that it's really the players that did a lot of the accomplishments that he gets the credit for. I mean, obviously he's going to, say that. That's the kind of person that Saban is. But I think this is really just an incredible honor. And I thought that I wanted to mention this because I do think that it's obviously an honor in which he deserves, an honor in which that he should be, he should get a lot of recognition for, and it's really, really cool to see him getting inducted 1 year after the retirement. My understanding is I believe they have to be 1 year retired, so it's really cool that, kind of 1 year to the day he gets officially told, hey, you are going to headline the class. Obviously, this is a first ballot unanimous Hall of Fame pick. This is as obvious of a pick as you could ever see, but it was just really, really cool to see him getting announced. Obviously, the College Game Day guys kind of presented him with a football. We're telling him how, they thought that this was the most obvious thing of all time, but deserving nonetheless. So he is going to be officially inducted at the Bellagio in Las Vegas. There's an awards dinner on December the 9th, 2025. So it's a little over a year away, or a little under a year away, I guess. And that's when the representative institutions are going to actually have their people inducted into the Hall of Fame. So for Nick Saban, that's when he's going to be officially inducted, and I'm sure there will be a lot of former players and former coaches that are going to try to attend that, or that will have things to say as regards to that. And I think that it's obviously very well deserved, and really, really cool to see Coach get the recognition and honor that he deserves. So just wanted to mention that kind of at the top of the show before we get into the basketball. So let's get right into the basketball. Alabama beats Texas A&M on the road, and the game went similar to how I expected, but there were definitely some things that I didn't expect, right? The score, for those of you unaware, the final score of this game was 94-88. My score prediction was 83-78. That score actually did happen. That exact score happened with maybe about 10 minutes to go in the game. So my kind of thought on Alabama being able to be the better team, but A&M's rebounding, being able to keep them in it, was a bit true. But I think really the thing that kept A&M in this game was how poorly this game was officiated. This game was an absolute official fest. When you look at SEC games and how SEC officials call games, sometimes you'll see a game where the officials stay completely out of the game, and it's really, a fairly evenly called matchup, and it looks like a pretty clean basketball game. And then you get a game like this Alabama A&M game, right? So, for example, the Kentucky-Mississippi State game started 30 minutes after the Alabama game. It finished before this Alabama game due to how many fouls were called and how much the officials stayed in this game. Just two completely different officiated games, and that's really the sad part when it comes to SEC officiating. This game just had no flow from a standpoint of the officials kind of inserting themselves into this game. A&M ends up having 2 people foul out. Alabama has 2 people foul out. There is a total of 58 fouls in this game and 88 foul shots. That just leads to a very terrible flow of a game. It leads to a game that's just tough to watch at times, and a game where it really feels like defense isn't really even allowed to take place, right? There were a few moments in this game where it felt like if you were defending at all, you were getting called for a foul. And then, oddly enough, there were other moments where it felt like people were getting hacked and you just weren't blowing the whistle, right? It was poorly called from the get-go. And that was on both sides, right? There were poor calls against Alabama. There were poor calls against Texas A&M. I thought that just in general, this game was not called to the level in which you want an SEC basketball game to be called. It's something that they talk about a lot. I know Southeastern 16 is going to, I'm sure they will talk at length about this one. This is just not the type of game that you want to watch because it makes for a terrible, terrible viewing experience when the officials insert themselves into this game at the level in which they did. But, obviously this game happened, so let's talk about what actually happened, outside of the officials. First and foremost, I thought that the difference in this game was how well Alabama rebounded. a lot was said, and I made a note about it, about how good Texas A&M is rebounding the basketball. They're the number one offensive rebounding team in the country. They're an incredibly good rebounding team, and at times it's their only offense. However, Alabama out-rebounded A&M. They out-offensive rebounded them. They out-defensive rebounded them. They just completely out-rebounded A&M from the get-go. And it really felt like Alabama had more fight on the glass this entire game. And in my opinion, it ended up being the big difference in this game. Alabama out-rebounds the game by 8. Alabama shoots decently well in this game. Definitely not their best percentages. Their 2-point percentage actually took a dip in this game, shooting only 45% compared to their average of about 60 to 70. The 3-point percentage, I thought by and large, for most people, the 3-point percentage in this game was pretty good. The two exceptions were Grant Nelson and LeBaron Fallon did not shoot super well. But outside of that, Aiden Holloway, Chris Youngblood both go 3 of 6. Mark Sears goes 4 of 10. Stevenson goes 1 of 3. Reed goes 1 of 3. You're completely fine with all those numbers. The 0 of 4 from Grant and 1 of 5 from LeBaron was really the only numbers that were not ideal. Obviously, then the free throw numbers, Jaren goes 3 of 6. You'd like to see that number be a little higher. Mo D goes 0 of 2. You'd like to see that, obviously, him make one. Darion goes 6 of 9. Excuse me. So there were definitely some moments in this one where it felt like the free throw shooting could have been better, but the free throw shooting for A&M was even worse. They made just one more free throw, even though they had 8 more attempts. So, free throw shooting for both teams was not where you want it to be. Alabama shooting just 67%. But as I said, the difference in this game was really how physical Alabama was on the glass, right? Alabama was super physical on the glass, and it was the difference in the game, right? Grant Nelson has 4 offensive rebounds. LeBaron Fallon has 4 offensive rebounds. Stevenson had a huge game. He actually wins the hard hat. He has 3 offensive rebounds. He had 3 blocks in this game. Cliff, there will be a lot said about toughness, and this is not related to Janai Broome. I know a lot of Auburn fans are going to relate it to it. But Janai Broome turned his ankle, and hopefully he will end up being okay. But Cliff Amori turns his ankle in this game. He lands on Jaren Stevenson, turns his ankle, and there was some question, would Cliff even be able to return? Is he going to be hurt? How bad is he going to be out? Because it was a pretty bad turn. And Cliff returned in this game, and he played. I'm not saying he was perfect. I'm sure he was in pain. You could tell that he was not 100%. But he returned in this game, and he finished this game. And there was a toughness that you could tell that he was just kind of gritting it out for his teammates. And that was a big deal, right? Alabama had already had problems where Grant Nelson had fouled out, and Mo D had fouled out, or was soon there going to foul out. And so we really needed the size down low. At times, we ended up having to go Darion and Jaren as the 4-5, which Jaren played such a good game in the paint that we were able to do. But obviously, that's undersized for what we typically are going down in the paint. I thought that in general that most of the guys played, really played very, very tough. And I thought that this is a game that showed you that you can win in a lot of different ways, because Alabama's offense was still able to be fairly successful even without the rhythm, right? Usually when you have no rhythm and flow in a game, you can't, your offense just is very stagnant, right? When there's a lot of free throws, you get no rhythm, no flow, and your offense doesn't move. But oddly enough, Alabama actually, puts up almost a 1.2 points per possession and has a pretty good offense this game. And I thought that it was really the difference in the game that Alabama was able to find offense. And it really felt like at times the only offense A&M could get was the free throw, right? Payne ends up shooting 15 free throws. He ended up being their MVP of the game, and it really felt like he was just kind of hunting free throws, and it kept him in the game. But inevitably, it was not enough to win this game. Alabama ends up winning the game and moves out of College Station with the win. A couple of people I do want to note because I thought that they played massive games. Obviously, Mark Sears, 27 points. He ends up 40% from three, 90% from the line. Felt like he started the game pretty slow, but then was in complete control. They had kind of talked about him at moments in this game where it felt like he wasn't doing a whole lot, and then immediately he had 15 points, right? But that is Mark Sears, where it's a really quiet 15, quiet 20. So I thought that was normal. The other two that I think I want to talk about that really had successful games was Aiden Holloway, again for another game, looked super comfortable, looked like he was in control. He had a few fouls that were a little careless, but in general, felt like he was in control of what he wanted to do. And when he is comfortable with the ball in his hands, he's just really great, right? He's hitting shots. He's hitting shots at a high clip as well as finishing around the rim. And that's something that you don't always see. And Aiden being able to finish at the rim at the rate he has been really, really big for how well the offense has been able to move. And then the other one's Chris Youngblood. And I thought that Chris played probably his best game in Crimson so far. He had a big rebound to help seal this game. He had some big free throws to help seal this game. The only thing, if I have to say one thing about Chris, is it feels like he's being a little too unselfish. There were two moments in which he passed up shots that I think he had the better shot, and when he passed it up, we got an objectively worse shot. One of them was at the very end of the game when we ended up going two offensive rebounds, and Mark Sears finally hit the third three. The second shot, Chris probably should have put up because he was wide open. He ended up pump faking. We ended up getting the three out of that possession, but that's one that I think Nate's going to want to have back because you aren't always going to get that third offensive rebound. And then the second one was on that same side. He passed up an open shot and gave the shot to Darion in the corner. Darion ends up missing it, and it just felt like because Chris was in rhythm and how he caught it, that if he just would have went up with the shot, I think that he had the better look and the better angle. So there are some things where on that, I think as he gets more in the flow of the offense, he's going to understand that he just has to take that shot. But that's the only thing that I would say about Chris is I think he's being a little too unselfish, which obviously isn't always a terrible thing, but I think in this moment it's hurting his offense because he definitely is a great three-point shooter, and if he is in rhythm, I think that he's the guy you want taking those shots. So that's the one thing I will say about Chris is I would like to see him take more shots and, kind of hunt his shot a little bit. Obviously, don't put up something that's, out of character and not in the rhythm. But if it's in the rhythm and in the flow of the offense, don't pass it up just because you took one last possession, right? If you're still in flow, take the shot, right? At the end of the day, similar to what Nate says to Aiden, hey, you can't pass it up. I think that's the same thing with Chris. You just can't pass it up. And I know that there was a comment about the announcer said about him passing one up and thought he got pulled for it. I think that is absolutely the case where I think Nate's going to start pulling him for passing up those shots, especially when you go into film review and they realize, hey, this is the shot we want. And sometimes what Nate will say is if you pass up an open shot, you get a worse one. And I think in both cases, that ended up being the case. Again, with the first one, it worked out because we did get the rebound and Mark ended up hitting a three on the last shot. But you're not always going to get the rebound, so you can't go based off of, hey, we got the rebound, right? The shot that Chris had was just better than the one Mark had. And so, like I said, you're going to want to take that shot in the future. But Alabama does end up winning this game. Alabama gets to come out of College Station with a win. and you move on to the next game. So that's what I had to talk about as relates to that game. Like I said, obviously really good to leave College Station with a win. That was a really hard-fought game and not a game that you really want to drop, especially with them losing Wade Taylor. But you kind of survive and advance and move on to the next game. And as it relates to the next game, I think obviously we want to talk about Ole Miss. And this is actually an Ole Miss team that currently sits at 3-0 in SEC. And the reason that's important is there's currently only 3 teams in the conference that sit at 3-0, and that's Alabama, Ole Miss, and Auburn. So this game will determine who at least one of those that goes to 4-0 is. So this gives us an idea as to where Alabama sits in the pecking order for the SEC. Ole Miss has won a couple of pretty good games this year, right? They beat BYU, they beat Colorado State, they beat Louisville, right? Some earlier season games. And then so far in the SEC play, they have beaten Georgia, right? Which actually looks like a much better win, especially after Georgia beat Kentucky. They beat Arkansas and they beat LSU, right? So they have a couple of good wins in conference. One on the road, two at home. So it really is going to see how well Alabama is, or how well Ole Miss is prepared to play kind of the higher end part of the SEC. Because Alabama will clearly be one of the best teams that Ole Miss has played. Ole Miss has played or has lost to Purdue and Memphis this year. But I think that Alabama has a good chance to win this game, right? Obviously, we'll talk about how I think that's going to happen here in just a second, but kind of from a wide scale looking at it, I think that Ole Miss has played a tougher schedule here recently because of the SEC, but had a pretty weak non-conference schedule outside of Memphis and their MTE, right? Memphis and their MTE was pretty good, but outside of that, they did not do a great job scheduling. A lot of 200, 300 level Ken Palm opponents, which is what we saw out of Oklahoma, and we saw how that ended up happening. I do think, however, that Ole Miss has, had a pretty good start to their conference slate, and I think that's going to get them off on the right foot. And I think that Chris Beard's obviously a really good coach. So when you're looking at Ole Miss, I think the thing that you have to look at is, can they just string together some wins, right? They've already started with 3 in conference. But if they can string together wins, that's what's going to help them, be able to keep competing near the top of the SEC. Because I think Ole Miss is somebody that was picked near the bottom of the SEC. However, Chris Beard is good enough of a coach, and Ole Miss has a decent enough roster that they could definitely scare some of the teams at the top. And so Alabama's going to have to play their game, right? So first and foremost, what does Ole Miss do really well? They're a slightly better defensive team than offensive team. That's a Chris Beard team. They do a great job turning you over, as well as not turning the ball over themselves. And they do a great job blocking shots and getting steals, right? So they're a big blocks, steals, turnovers team on defense. And they take care of the ball a lot on offense, right? I wouldn't call them super efficient from a shooting standpoint, but they do a good job making sure that they don't cause the mistakes that get rid of the basketball. So I do think this is going to be a fairly clean game from a turnover perspective. I think this is going to be a fairly clean game. I think that Alabama is going to have to do a good job turning over not turning over the basketball, but I do think that with the way Ole Miss plays, I think this could end up being a game in which there gets to be some flow, because I think that Ole Miss is going to try to get some steals and blocks and such. But I think that because of how they don't turn over the ball and how they like to play, I think that there can be some flow as it relates to this game. A few of the games in which Ole Miss has played this year have been very much the pace was determined by how both teams were playing. And so because of that, I do think that Alabama can get the pace of this game up a little bit. And that obviously goes into Alabama's favor as long as Alabama can control the basketball and not turn it over, right? Alabama had some problems with turnovers earlier in the offseason, in the preseason and in non-conference play. But the question is, can they not turn the ball over? Keep turning the ball over, because that definitely can cause us some issues. So that's really the question when you're looking at this game. Ole Miss has some shooters, Sean Padula and Jalen Murray, both really, really good shooters. Jalen Murray obviously having been there last year, Padula the transfer from Virginia Tech. But both of them shooting over 40% on high attempts, right? Padula at 90 attempts this year. Murray has 82 so far this season. So these guys have very high attempts. So this isn't a situation where, this team is afraid to shoot the three. They're obviously going to want to shoot the three. They are one of the higher three-point shooting teams in the country from an attempt standpoint. They also are somebody that give up a lot of threes, right? When you're looking at the percentages that they give up about 45% of opponent shots to be from three, right? That's obviously something that plays very much into how Alabama likes to play basketball. So I do think that this is another situation where as long as Alabama has the right guys taking the right shots, the shots will be there to be had, right? Similar to this A&M game that we just played. Obviously, it's going to be slightly different because of how the defense is going to be played, but it's a situation where the shots are going to be able to be had as long as you have the right guy taking them, right? So this is, again, the situation where the reason I mentioned about Chris Youngblood not passing up shots, this is a game where you don't need him passing up shots. You don't need Aiden Holloway passing up shots. You obviously never need Mark Sears passing up shots. And that's really, really important when you look at games like this, because their ability to make shots and to not pass them up, because Ole Miss is a good enough defensive team that they may not give you a ton of attempts, right? It's like if you pass up the one open look you get, they're a good enough defense where they can scramble enough to you don't get another open attempt for the rest of the shot clock, right? So you really have to take the shot when you're given it. And I do think that's going to be a really important note for this game, is to play in your flow of the offense and take the shot when you're given it. The other place that I think Alabama can have a lot of success in this game is rebounding, right? Alabama showed in the A&M game by out-rebounding A&M that they can be a very elite rebounding team, right? A very elite rebounding team from an offensive and defensive standpoint. They just have to put their mind to it and compete. So I do think that Alabama is going to be a better rebounding team than Ole Miss. Ole Miss does not have the elite rebounders outside of Malik Dia, who's an elite defensive rebounder, but they don't have the rebounders that A&M has. So I think that this is going to be a easier rebounding competition, but Alabama obviously still has to compete, right? Alabama still has to compete on the glass. Alabama still has to put in the effort. And I think that Alabama can win the rebounding battle. And obviously, if you can win the rebounding battle, that gives you a leg up into winning the game. Because obviously, the easiest threes are off of offensive rebounds. Alabama's speed can happen better when you get the defensive rebound. We just get into the flow of our offense more. And I think that overall, everything comes easier when you're winning the glass. So if I had to guess, I do think this is going to be a slightly higher possession game. I would probably think 74, 75 possessions maybe. I do think that Alabama wins this game. I think this gets up into the 90s as well. I'm going to say this game probably gets up into the 92-81, 92-78 type possession range. Points range. I do think that Alabama can win this game. I think that because this is at home, I think that Alabama will be kind of fired up to be back in Coleman for the first time in quite a while, actually. Alabama having not played at home since before the New Year's and not played a big game at home since, Creighton. So I think this is going to be a really big game that a lot of people are going to be excited for. Obviously, students are back in town, so I think this is going to be one that a lot of people are going to be ready for. And I do think that Alabama wins this game and gets off to the 4-0 start in SEC play. So that's my thoughts as it relates to this game. Like I said, I'm going to go 91-78 as for a final. I do think that, like I said, I do think that Alabama wins. I think that Alabama gets off to a 4-0 start in SEC play, and I think that we move on to the next one. So that's my thoughts as it relates to this game. Thank you so much, everyone, for watching, and I will catch you in the next episode. Peace.